What I'm trying to do each week is just pass along some ideas and tips. They certainly should not supplant your own observations and your own input from local pastors, friends, your area director, and fellow leaders. But I'm just hoping to pass along maybe a few things that get you thinking, and you can chew on these. So we're looking at John 5, and what we do is in the fall, we're looking at the odd chapters of the Gospel of John and working through the whole book, and then we'll do the even in the spring. And John 5 is a challenging chapter, actually. That's why I took it myself. We're going to focus on verses 1 through 15. The second half of John 5 is actually extremely challenging. I wouldn't recommend you doing it in a club talk ever. There's hundreds and thousands of years of church division based on the rest of the chapter. I'll leave it to you to look that up and see what he's talking about there. But this is a great story about Jesus healing a man who had been an invalid for 38 years. So I'll give you an overview about it, and I'll post my notes as always. Haven't gotten to it yet, but hopefully this week I'll just put a dedicated page on Why I'll Help where I'll post all these notes. And but all the other ones have been available through Twitter. I just put them on there. That's where you can find them, Why I'll Help Twitter. But here's the gist of the story. Basically, verses 1 through 2, Jesus goes to Jerusalem for one of the 3 required feasts for any male who is Jewish. So he's going up there, doing his duty. And then when he gets there, verse 3, he encounters a man who has been disabled. And this man is, a whole group of disabled people, and that they have been sitting near this pool of water, just hanging out there, kind of congregating. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you have, kind of a modern version of the Bible, anything except for probably the King James Version, you will not have verse 4. I'm not going to go into it. That's kind of the sort of things that we talk about in hermeneutics and exegesis classes, but basically it's not in the earliest manuscripts. So that verse is not there. If you want to know more about that, Google it or send me an email. I'll be happy to talk to you a lot about it. But that's where we get the background information. It's not in the earliest manuscripts, but about the stirring of the waters and the healing that supposedly came from there. That was a Jewish legend and a pagan legend. But that's not in verse 4. Probably most Bibles would have a footnote about that. Anyway, moving on. Verse 5, Jesus does encounter the man who had been an invalid for 38 years. In fact, he asks about him, which is a really interesting thing, and finds out that he had been an invalid. Then he asks him if he wants to get well, which is certainly something you should highlight. Jesus' question to this man, that should probably be one of the focal points of this talk. Do you want to get well? Let it ring out. Let it be silent for a little bit. Let them just think about if Jesus was to say that to them. Well, he asks them that, but here's the thing is the invalid does not answer Jesus's question. I mean, the obvious answer should be, Jesus, yes, I want to get well. Instead, the invalid comes and tells Jesus his plan. He basically changes the topic and answers and starts talking about something that is his plan versus Jesus's plan. So the invalid doesn't answer his question, instead gives him his own solution to his problem. I'll make more of a point about that in a moment. But what ends up happening is Jesus heals the man. The man takes up his mat and walks. And interestingly, the man has no idea who Jesus is. He takes off. I mean, it's fascinating. The man gets healed by Jesus without knowing who Jesus is. It's a really interesting thing that happens there. Then the next section, the Jews get really upset, not because of the healing, though they're going to start getting mad about that, but they get really upset that the man did work on the Sabbath. The Sabbath was the Jewish holy day, and it's actually Saturday, and they weren't allowed to do any work. So actually, at this point, they're not all that frustrated about the healing. That's not the focal point. Focal point is that he picked up his mat. That was work, and so they were not happy that he was doing work. They obviously miss a miracle by getting bogged down in the religious details. Not that we would ever miss miracles because we get too bogged down in details, but they certainly did that in this story. And then at the end, Jesus returns to the man and he tells him who he is and that he warns them about not sinning. And I'll mention that. So anyway, that's the gist of the story. Here's a couple main points, directions that you might want to go with. One might be lies that we believe. So we think we know what we really want. We are all convinced that we know the best plan and solution for the issues in our life. And unfortunately, we end up believing things that aren't God's best and in fact are lies. I mean, this was a myth about this healing in the water, and the man didn't know it. Second, a possible main point is that Jesus wants to work in your life even before you know who he is. Jesus is not saying you need to know all about the Bible. You don't need to even know the fullness of all the details of Jesus' life. You don't need to do X, Y, and Z. The fact of the matter, I mean, this is not debatable. Jesus heals a man that doesn't even know who he is. With that, I think we can say that Jesus wants to work in your life now. It doesn't matter if you walk through that door and the first time you're hearing Jesus' name. Jesus wants to start working now, not when you figure this out. Today, right here. Another thing is that Jesus leads with grace and healing and help, and then follows later with the truth about himself and about sin. So it kind of builds on the other point. But I think it's really powerful that Jesus heals the man, helps the man, then comes back later and says, this is who I am, and in fact, stop sinning. My way is better. I mean, it definitely reminds me in John 8, which we'll talk about, I mean, the woman who's caught in adultery. Jesus protects the woman, saves the woman, rescues the woman, gives the woman grace, and then later says, go and sin no more. This is a very similar kind of story that happens here as far as leading with grace and then coming in with truth. And then we hear echoes of that from John 1:14, where Jesus was full of grace and truth. We see this in John, grace, leading with grace, and then also coming in with truth, and always having both of them. The last one is that Jesus offers a chance to get up and to have a new life, to resurrect. I have it in the notes here, but the actual word for getting up, when he says get up, take your mat and walk, get up, is one of the words that's used for resurrection. It's used in Romans. It's used in 1 Corinthians 15, where it talks all about the resurrection. It also can be used just to talk about like literally getting up, but it might be, in fact, N.T. Wright makes a note about this, it might be a bit of an allusion to resurrection. I want to do new creation in your life. I want you to experience a newness of life. I want you to experience resurrection now in your life. So those are a couple of angles that you can take. Here's a couple of things that this story tells us about Jesus. One is that Jesus cares about our troubles and that he finds out the details. I love that part early in the story. Two, Jesus does not force change in our life. He says that, do you want to get well? He asks him a question. Now later, he just kind of jumps in and heals them. He tells them to take up his mat and walk, but he doesn't force it. Three, Jesus can heal people. That is a truth about Jesus' divinity that we should make clear in Young Life and Wyldlife talks. Jesus can heal. He's unlike any person that I've ever met around me. He's different than us because he has power to heal. And fourth, that Jesus returns to the man to warn the man about something worse than being an invalid for 38 years. Imagine how awful that would be, being still unable to move for 38 years. The results of your sin, the consequences of your sin are worse than that. So moving on, what does this have to do with our life? First, it may take 38 years before an encounter with Jesus changes your life. But that would be really sad. In fact, why wait? So what does this have to do with our life? People, teenagers, Wyldlife, Young Life, college age students, don't wait 38 years on your mat. Just don't wait. Why would you do that when full life is available now through Christ? Secondly, what does it have to do with our life? We have our own solutions to life. Jesus may have a completely different solution. I'll come back to that in an illustration. Third, eternal death is worse than being disabled for 38 years. What does this have to do with our life? The truthfulness of the eternal death that we all face should scare us a bit, more than if we were to become paralyzed for 38 years. And fourth, we aren't expected to have a perfect answer about for how Jesus is working in our life. The Jewish people come up to the man that was healed and they say, "Who did this to you?" And literally the man does not know. So we aren't expected to have perfect answers. I mean, literally the guy didn't even know Jesus' name. The matter of the fact is he just knew he had been healed. And that gives us a model that there is not some prerequisite for having Jesus' healing in your life, for your life to get changed. Jesus can just go ahead and change life if he wants to, and often he does. Here's a couple relevant technical details, things that when I'm doing club talks, I just translate on the fly, and we can definitely do that in talks. One is when it talks about that he goes up to Jerusalem. I say, a world famous religious center with a huge temple in the middle. In fact, today it's still the center of so much interest and conflict. Jesus is going to that place. Boom, done. It talks about the feast of the Jews. So there's a couple things in the beginning of the story, a colonnade, feast of the Jews, a few other things. I would probably just read them really fast. They're not essential to the story. But being an invalid, which basically is meaning that he more or less just was paralyzed. It's really a sharp word in English, invalid, almost as if your life doesn't matter. Also what the Sabbath is, I explained that earlier. What the law is, they're really upset that the man had broken the law because of picking up his mat. So there's a lot of Old Testament laws. You could just hold up your Bible and where's my Bible? Well, here's one of my Bibles right here, and you could say, look, the whole first chunk of it is full of laws. In fact, 613 of them. Those are what the laws are. And then the last one, the technical one, would be the word "get up," which I already mentioned, can be an allusion to the resurrection. Here's a couple illustrations, and then I'll close it up and see if you have any comments or questions or your own ideas. One is that I would strongly suggest using the tangible items from the Bible story itself as your illustrations. So if one of the main items in the talk is a mat, I would bring a mat, and I would challenge you to possibly do the first half of your talk while lying on the ground. Might sound bizarre, might sound crazy, people might not completely see, but I guarantee you they will not just kind of zone out because you're not visible. I think it'd be a club talk like they'd never seen before. I'd say do a good chunk of your talk while laying on the mat. In fact, maybe just keep reading it and telling the story until when you talk about, you say get up, and then stand up and just leave that as a visual contrast of the place where we were and the place where we're going in Christ. Second, you could have a pool of water. You could get one of those little kiddie pools and have it there and just use that as an illustration basically about our solution, or his solution, which is a pool of life, versus our solution, which is Christ and his way for our life. Basically, you have a legend of a pool and a myth basically of this is going to be the thing that solves my life. And then we have Jesus's way, and you could contrast that. So just bring in a kiddie pool or something like that. You could also bring in an illustration of a question. So do you want to get well? There's some great quotes out there. One, I'll post it on there, is about C.S. Lewis, about how us as children oftentimes are content making mud pies when a holiday at sea is available to us. We basically don't even recognize that there's something that would be so much better than what our plan is. I'll put that in there. And then the last one illustration is just you could even make a sign that says, do you want to get well? And maybe you, on the next line, really big sign, get one of those huge posters, and you could say, I want, and then do a big line there, like a blank, and just hold it up. Geez, I want this. Can you see that? I want, and hold it up and say, how would you answer that? How would you answer Jesus's question? Do you want to get well? And your response is, I want, and then fill in lots of the common answers that we might have. That guy wanted to get in the pool. Other people I know want to be popular. Other people want to have a better family. Other people want to date someone. Other people want to stop feeling sad. It doesn't mean that anything of those things are wrong, but here's the thing, Jesus' answer for your life might be completely different than the solutions that you've been thinking would solve your problems. So Jesus' answer might be completely different. And that really begins with saying yes to Christ, with saying, yes, I want you to work in my life. Jesus, show me who you are. And you could just fill in the blank about the next step to a closer relationship with Christ. So anyway, there's a couple ideas, and hopefully I've been helpful. I'll just wrap it up with that. Does anyone have any comments, questions, anything that was particularly helpful or interesting about this passage? Anything you'd like me to clarify? I know there's a couple of you who've been coming in and out, and there's a few that are still on here. Otherwise, I'm just going to wrap it up, but I'll just give you a second in case you want to type something up. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in, and I'm sure there's others that will probably check this out later. And have a great week with Club and your talks and hanging out with kids. All right, talk to you later. Bye.